Have I screwed this up? I got this. What is going on there? You see how? You see how that one's sticking up and that one isn't? Have I done something wrong? I think I might have the camera plate backwards, upside down. Oops. Well, I'll have to fix that. Okay, try again. Folks, this is the Quadrysteria Rush 4-inch copter. This is almost, but not exactly, the kit version you get off the Quadrysteria site. Of course, it has the Rush 4-inch frame. It comes with the ZTW 2205 2500 kV race spec motors. This one has XM20 F390 ESCs, and I've got them running BL Heli 14.6. The kit version sold by Quadrysteria comes with a Dodo flight controller and a standard PDB. And of course, I've subbed that out for my favorite RROSD, PDB, and OSD in one from Red Rotor and the F390. Actually, there was no question I was going to sub this out because I just got the first V3.0 F303 boards with the MCU 6000 gyro that can do the 8 kilohertz gyro sync, and so naturally the very next build I did, I was going to put it in there. So of course I didn't use the Dodo, I used the F303 version 3, and that's pretty much my go-to for a flight controller, PDB, and OSD. I pretty much put this in every build that I do. So my apologies to Quadrysteria for not building this up exactly how you would get it if you bought it off their site, but I just couldn't resist. The video transmitter, you can't really see it in there. It is a Hawkeye 200 milliwatt video transmitter. I've never used a Hawkeye before, but I've heard very good things about them. As long as it puts out 200 milliwatts and doesn't burn itself out or die, I'll be happy with it. It is a race band, 40 channel race band transmitter. Got some dip switches here that I've got showing through the window at the top. That's just how I decided was the best way to mount it. Now this kit was shipped to me with a Foxeer XAT 600M camera, which is basically the same as the 1177 that we all know and love. The new version of the kit is shipping with a Foxeer Aero camera, that's the 1177 with a built-in OSD that does voltage and flight time. That's okay, but to me it doesn't really substitute for a full OSD with a current sensor. I think a current sensor is really mandatory for anybody who's serious about tuning and flying and just knowing what's going on when you're in the air. So a camera with a built-in voltage sensor and timer is better than nothing, but it's really a stopgap, and I almost would prefer to have an 1177 with no OSD cluttering up the screen and just go with a real OSD. But not everyone may feel that way, especially people who are on a budget. And the inclusion of the Foxeer Aero in the Rush kit is a nice way for Quadrysteria to get something in your hands without having to go whole hog and really raise the price of the kit substantially to include a full OSD. Now the antenna that you see here is also not the antenna that you would get if you ordered the kit today. Since this shipped to me, they've upgraded it to include the TBS Triumph antenna, which by all respects is a very good antenna, although I haven't personally flown it. There are a couple other ways in which I've deviated from the standard build. The main one is that this actually comes with a bracket right here that you mount that holds the XT60 in place, and it actually is a very clever mechanism where the bracket sort of slides in and this screw retains the bracket, and the bracket holds the XT60 with a little bit of friction and a little bit of pressure. And it's very clever, but the reason I didn't use it is that I had this pigtail pre-made. And so I was like, well, I got it ready to go. I just stuck it on the build. And this style of XT60 connector doesn't fit. You can see this is the fancy schmancy style with a little shroud here. And it's got a little, anyway, it's a little different. And it's just thick enough that it doesn't actually fit in the little connector. So I didn't want to take it off and resolder everything. So I didn't use it. But if you get this, you'll get, it actually comes with an XT60 that does fit. It's a standard XT60. I just didn't use it and it bit me. So if you buy the kit, you'll get a little bracket that holds the XT60 in place right here. And again, I'm not really representing it in its absolute tip-top form because I sort of built it the way I like to build it rather than the way that like you're supposed to build it. Anyway, again, my apologies to Quadrysteria for that, but I hope everyone will forgive me. The frame, I like the design of the frame. It's got the boxed in front that I like very much, got two standoffs here. Some frames in this size start to go with just like 4 standoffs, and I think you really lose something in terms of rigidity and crash resistance. Having the boxed in frame with the camera plates here is a really nice way of having a strong frame without adding too much weight. There is a single standoff in the back, which is a little different, but I guess, I mean, I could see the point. It does sort of give you a little more clearance for the props here, and on a frame this size, you just wouldn't have room to have those standoffs, or it might get in the way. And so I think that's the main reason that this single standoff in the back is the way that it is. Having the single standoff in the back would make it harder to mount the FPV antenna the way that I prefer to mount it. And if we go and look at my other copter, so if we go and look at my QAVR, you can see that I've moved over to the method of having the antenna come out the back. And I think that this is a better way to mount the antenna because, again, it's the first thought is that, well, won't the antenna get blocked by the frame? But the thing is, when you're up tilted, no, the antenna's sticking straight up in the air. It doesn't matter. Tip it forward, tip it back, whatever. But having the antenna coming out of the top plate really invites stuff to break this bracket right here, to break the antenna off. It really, whereas if the antenna is sticking out the back, there's sort of nothing to really snag, and it kind of just, I think it's less likely to break that way. It also means that you see that the Hawkeye has a pigtail. I'm not even sure if you can really see that very well. The Hawkeye has a pigtail, and the pigtail is coming over here, and the Hawkeye's mounted here. If you were to try to mount a standard video transmitter without a pigtail, I think you would have a really hard time doing it. Maybe you could stick it in the hole and just have it sticking down here, and it wouldn't get in the way of the props. I think that's pretty questionable, though. So I think you're going to really need one with a pigtail in order to do this. Now they've provided you a hole here, and presumably that hole is if you want to do a standard mount in the back as opposed to over here. I'm not sure that there's enough room top to bottom to fit a video transmitter vertically, and if you were to have one sticking straight out the back, it would kind of need to be cocked to the side because the standoff is going to get in the way. So I think that Quadrysteria has kind of locked you into a certain way of mounting the video transmitter antenna, and if you don't like that way of doing it, you don't have a lot of awesome options to do it some other way. You're kind of going to be working around the design intent. And then when you're done, you'll still have this gosh darn little hump here, you know, not doing anything. Now, Quadrysteria was smart when they designed this. This is a 2 millimeter, 1.5 millimeter top plate. If I were a better reviewer, I would have looked this up before I did the review. I think it's 1.5 millimeter. Maybe it's 2 millimeter. And with this little sticky outy bit, that's going to break. That's going to break really easily. So they've given you a reinforcing plate here. And it's just this plate right here, and it doubles up the thickness there to give just a little bit extra strength and binds it over to this standoff. And that's really nice. The bottom is 3.5 millimeter. I did do some research before I did this review, so it's just a little thicker than your standard 3 millimeter. It's single piece, and I dare say, I mean, if we look at the cutouts, there's not an extreme amount of cutouts. I might be a little bit worried right here about how thin that is, but this is, I hope that this is not going to be like a super high stress area of the frame. I don't know. Maybe in a crash, you can see that's where the camera plate sort of fits in. That does make me worry a little, but it's probably just because I'm a worrywart, not because of anything that's actually going to happen in real life. I don't know, though. The thing is that these copters end up pretty light. Let's see. Now, this is no battery, and we'll set that to grams, and 276 grams without the battery, 433 grams with the battery. That is mighty respectable weight. Now, of course, it would be about 500 grams if we were to put a GoPro or a Xiaomi Yi on there. This is not the hardest build I've ever done, the tightest or the hardest build I've ever done, but it definitely probably should not be your first build. If you go sticking pins on everything, you're not going to fit everything in here. It's going to be hard. Somebody might do it, but you don't have a lot of room here to have a bunch of pins on the flight controller, on the receiver, etc. And you can see I have D-pinned literally everything, and it fits in there really nicely, but getting it all to fit neatly and soldering everything up, this really is not a first-time job. So for example, you can see that we've got plenty of room for the PDB and the flight controller, and then oftentimes what I might do is put the video transmitter and the receiver on the top plate, but there just isn't any room really to get the receiver up there. Maybe if you really squeezed, it's really tight though. There's not a lot of room for that. So this really, I think, should not be your first build. That being said, it is easier than doing something like a pure X frame like QQ190, Mitsuko, Krieger, etc. On those, you really have no room to work with. You just have the tiny stack, and you got to fit everything in there. And on this one, you do have a relatively generous top plate to figure out where you want your video transmitter to go, and so on. So I would call this an intermediate build at maybe an intermediate / advanced. Definitely not a beginner build, and not a full-on advanced build, but up there. What remains to be seen is how this frame flies. It is a 4-inch copter, and I've never flown a 4-inch copter. I have flown one. I've never owned a 4-inch copter. And a friend of mine who built several 4-inch copters ended up not really liking them at the end of the day because he felt like they were a little underpowered compared to his 5-inch ones, and he wasn't sure that the additional maneuverability and agility really was worth it. But Quadrysteria has posted on their website that this very copter is breaking lap records on some tracks. So I'll be very interested to see how it flies in the air. And in fact, I intend to find out how fast it goes, because you'll see I have mounted the camera on the very frontmost set of holes, and this sucker will go up to quite a lot of up tilt. So I'm going to start that way, but I'm going to maiden this thing maybe tomorrow, see how it flies, and then I'm going to get it up to some up tilt. I'm going to do some tuning videos also, and I'm going to push it all the way to max up tilt and see how fast it goes and how many amps it pulls and how flyable it is. But that's all for another day. For now, happy flying.